We've had the very good fortune here at the rally, and I'm speaking as a guest of the rally who has had the privilege of being in attendance, that in those years when Mr. du Berrier has been able to come to the United States at the time of the rally, invariably after working him into the schedule, sometimes late in the evening, there's been the difficulty of trying to work out additional time for questions and answers and so forth. And so I think that undoubtedly a man of his encyclopedic knowledge and experience, this will probably prove true today, but there's rarely enough time to even give just a brief synopsis of the unique experiences from his vantage point there in Monte Carlo and Monaco. And it's certainly a pleasure to welcome back to the New England Rally a gentleman whose life has been a mixture between James Bond and Marco Polo, and a person who has been able to be in the top touch of so many of the leaders, probably more than any other living American, on a first-name basis of so many leaders of various countries, principalities around the world, and a person who periodically gives a very special attention to evening seminars across the land for those who've been able to book him in times when he has been here, a frequent contributor to American Opinion, Review of the News, and publisher of his own monthly newsletter, H2B Reports. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the New England Rally Mr. Hilaire du Berrier.
Thank you, Dr. McDonald. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I've just been told that I have 30 minutes in which to tell you about the whole situation of the world. And I feel as though I'm about to try to pack a grand piano in a cigar box. As Larry told you, I sit over in Europe and I compile my monthly intelligence report, which is called H2B Reports. I might mention before starting that the July-August special issue is going to be on the current so-called Pentagon leaks. But we'll come to that later on. You know, as I sit over there and watch what is happening over here with the perspective that distance gives you, and read in the newspapers that this young man named Speck, who took one student nurse after another into a room and killed them, has now escaped the death penalty. I watch what's happened at Mylai when they take this boy, Calais, and sentence him to life. You know, I spoke in Nice, France, 4 weeks ago for a meeting there. A number of foreign service people from our government were there, foreign diplomats, and a man named Childs, who was once United States ambassador to Ethiopia, told me that when Calais got that death sentence, he said, I went right away to a telegraph office and I sent a telegram to Captain Aubrey Daniels, Fort Benning, Georgia, and all I said was one word, bravo. And I said, Ambassador Childs, I'd give anything in the world if they could send you into one of those villages over there in Vietnam, because in that brief moment between being hit by the bullet and turning over to Cheyne-Stokes breathing, you would have a blinding flash of common sense. You know, ladies and gentlemen, as you watch that frame of mind and you watch things that are happening over here, and you bear in mind that Calais trial was not at the end in itself, it was only the beginning. It establishes a precedent. And now we're going on to the next step to destroy our army, destroy the morale of the nation, you see. And as you watch this, and then you think of this business of repealing the death sentence under which we have guarded this man Speck, the only thing in the world that you can think of is one paragraph from Taine's History of the French Revolution. And I wish I could get my friend here, Dr. Larry McDonald, to go in with me and go into a peculiar form of graffiti for ourselves. All over Europe, we're seeing this graffiti that the students are printing on walls over there. And I would like to have some papers printed up that we might stick all over America. And we would begin with that paragraph from Taine's History of the French Revolution, in which Taine describes the climate existing as the old regime neared its end. And he said, among the governing as among the governed, all notion of the state was lost. The former through humanity become a duty, the latter through insubordination erected into a right. At the end of the 18th century, there was a horror of blood, among the upper as among the lower class and the middle class. An idyllic imagination coupled with refined social ways had completely destroyed the militant disposition. And everywhere our magistrates forgot that the preservation of society and civilization is of infinitely greater importance than the lives of a parcel of maniacs and malefactors. And that with the government as with the courts, their first duty is the preservation of order by force. How well that fits us. After we print that and start sending that around America, then I'd like to have my friend Dr. McDonald go into a small poster for a tourist attraction poster. What to see in Georgia. Visit Athens, Georgia. Come and see our wonderful university. See Dean Rusk, the man who framed Otto Otepka. Wouldn't that make a wonderful tourist attraction? You know, between the times when I'm writing reports over there, my mind is working overtime, trying to cook up trouble for somebody. I was invited into the home of a fine French family, and they were so proud to tell me that very often Sergeant Shriver and his wife came to their home. Now, this was the period when Sergeant Shriver was United States ambassador to Paris. And my French friend, who didn't speak a word of English, asked me if I would teach his little boy something to recite in English so that he could recite it when they have American guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that like a good American, I devoted 3 hours to instructing that youngster, teaching him to walk out into the center of a room, to bow gravely and say, "This is the Kennedy family credo," and then to start reciting, "Lives of great men all remind us we can win out in the race if, like them, we leave behind us footprints in somebody's face." And when I got the boy so that he could recite that with a very fine English pronunciation, recite it carefully enough that it wouldn't be misunderstood, I told him that then he was to bow gravely and say, "And that includes the race to get out of a submerged automobile." Now, you know, when you do things like that, this may seem frivolous to you, but ladies and gentlemen, when you spend all of your time compiling files, digging up intelligence reports, trying to condense them, well, you have to indulge a little bit of trivia, otherwise you'll go mad, and you will truly become what is commonly referred to over here as a kook or a lunatic fringer. And so I have to use that escape valve of humor once in a while, because think of the trouble. Think of what you're looking at when you're looking off towards Belgium and you're watching that common market performance. What a farce. And then you suddenly read that December 1970 report by Joe Alsop telling Americans that a paper has been put before President Nixon containing a study of the added value tax, and that is going to be imposed here in America. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know what that added value tax is? That is a tax levied on every step of a production from raw material to finished product. And it mounts up at the rate of a pyramid club. And why is that being studied for Nixon? Because there is a plan to bring you into the organization now referred to as the common market. And of course, once you belong to that, you have to adopt the common market taxation system. Now, England has just signed on the dotted line. Bear in mind that this common market is like communism. It's a one-way street. You can go in, but you can't come out. And it is a supranational government, really. You sacrifice a certain amount of your sovereignty when you go in. And I wonder how many Americans, reading the reports of England going into the common market, reports in which there was a little afterthought saying, some Americans are in favor of this, but others are very apprehensive and are fearful of it. You know what the meaning of that is? Now, this means that you should start being afraid of it, because once you are afraid that by England going into the common market, America is going to be faced with a closed combine that is keeping out our exports, why then you are conditioning yourself to accept the thesis that America must go into it. And you see in the same number of all the European papers, London Times, London Express, Paris Figaro, Le Monde. Le Monde in France is the most dignified paper in France. It is evil in the same way that the New York Times is, because it is left-wing with such perfect dignity. Consequently, it is like taking a rascal and dressing him as a gentleman. See, and you cannot expect wrong from a thing like that. And in all these numbers, in the same issues in which they talked about the Americans being, on one hand, happy that Britain is going in, and on the other hand, fearful of the consequences of this, there was then just one added sentence to the effect that, of course, America cannot go in because America is not a European country. Well, now you know what that is doing is preparing for the next phase. After Britain goes in, why, that will make it 7. Then Britain will start bringing in some of the outer 7 countries, which were lined up with her, the Scandinavian countries. And then a great sales campaign is going to put over on you people to the effect that it would be good if America would go in there, because it would guarantee the safety of our exports, our commerce, and also our currency. But of course, we're not a European country. So the solution then is to change this from the European common market into an Atlantic community. And America is what is referred to in Europe as a riverain state, which means that it borders on the Atlantic, and these European countries are on the Atlantic also. So then the name would be changed to the Atlantic Community, and once we were in so tightly we couldn't get out, it would be changed to Atlanticus. And you know, I could use up my whole 30 minutes talking about that. This is one of the things that you drive yourself crazy studying over there. I wonder how many of you people remember reading my report in Review of the News on Khrushchev's memoirs. Now, you know, if you haven't read this, I would beg you to try to get a back number from the American Opinion Room here, because the man that I talked about mostly in there was a certain Russian named Victor Louis. Victor Louis is the mysterious Russian who has a permanent passport, which enables him to go to any country outside of Russia. I run onto him in Paris in the new Ritz bar. The head waiters all know him. Suave, he speaks English like an Englishman. Victor Louis has a dacha outside of Moscow in the country. He has a marvelously big apartment overlooking the river in Moscow. He has 2 foreign cars. He is supposed to be the correspondent for the London Evening Standard, but he travels on a diplomatic passport. And I told in this article in Review of the News how Victor Louis slipped into Formosa mysteriously just 2 years ago. And you know the reason that he slipped into Formosa was because Russia was playing 2 cards. Formosa was afraid of America's approaching entente with Red China. They were viewing this big drive over here to get us to talk to Red China. And the Russians were taking this opportunity to go to send their man to Formosa to talk to Chiang Ching-kuo and tell him the Americans are going to take their distance from you as a means of making peace with Formosa. So why don't you make a deal with us? The Americans are going to take your distance as a means of making peace with Peking. So why don't you become friendly with us? Because we are having a fight with Peking right now. And of course that conflict is a phony. And Victor Louis is the man who started this, who started these negotiations with Formosa. And even though he made this trip there to start this, nothing was said about it in the English paper that he represents. He disappeared and went on to his next job, which of course was the handling of Khrushchev's memoirs. He approached the Moscow bureau chief for Time Life. That bureau chief arranged to have a man fly over to Stockholm. Almost $1 million were involved in that sale. Khrushchev will never see a kopeck of it. Why did Victor Louis have a hand in this? Well, we suddenly discover that there is a man now known as General Agayans. Agayans was expelled from France in 1932 as a Russian spy. In 1936, an American man and his wife were arrested in France as members of the Agayans network left behind to operate there. Agayans went back to Moscow to work with the KGB, and sometime later the European intelligence services discovered that during his years in France, he was head of a network which was compiling a dictionary, I should say a directory, in which is listed every radio, TV, and press man in the West who can be counted upon to give distribution to a release that is useful to the policy of the Soviet Union. And this is why he was given the job of handling the sale of the Khrushchev memoirs, so-called, to Time Life. Now, the reason that I've gone through all this to bring up Victor Louis' name, strange man. What a wonderful book it would make if we could have the whole story of his life. Comes up the question, how did the man ever learn to speak English like he does? And you know, it took me 1.5 years to get the answer to that. We discovered that 12 years ago, Agayans made the biggest coup in his life when he managed to seduce the secretary of one of the top-level officials of the British Embassy in Moscow. And the information that leaked from the British Embassy through this secretary in the years that followed was of tremendous importance to Soviet Russia. And a blow-up came. The woman was about to be exposed and shipped back to England. They couldn't let her go back to England and talk, so Victor Louis married her. And now when Louis comes out of Moscow on these diplomatic passports, the wife is held back there. They will never let her out of the country. They're never going to take a chance on that woman becoming disillusioned, going back to London and telling how the operation worked and is still working. The reason I went through all this was to tell you, draw your attention to the fact that you may have noticed in the newspapers 5 days ago a very brief 2-line mention that Mr. Victor Louis had visited Israel. And he is now conducting negotiations with Israel at the same time that the extreme left in Israel is insisting that they become more friendly with Moscow in order to make Moscow cease supporting the Arabs. And of course, all they're going to do is to permit Moscow to play the Arabs and the Israelis off against each other, and also to make the Egyptians afraid to talk to the Americans. It is really a network. It is really a basket of snakes, of serpents, of eels twining around each other when you get into this thing. And watch that name, Victor Louis. Watch what is going to come out in the immediate months ahead between Israel and Moscow, because you're going to see some big things happening there in the Mediterranean. I was talking about all this just before I left France. I had a group of friends come into my place for dinner before I came over here, and I told them I was going to speak to this rally. One of the men I had come to dinner was a Frenchman. I don't mind telling you his name. His name is Mr. Finis. And I tell you his name because I'd be very happy if somebody would splash his name all over and make him come out and take a stand and tell publicly what he told me, because it would have so much more effect. Finis is the French minister to The Hague. They have an ambassador there, but the reason they have a minister there is because the World Court is there. And Finis's job is to work in conjunction with the World Court on all cases dealing with patents. And he told me, do you realize that just last month, before I left to come home on vacation, to come down here to the Riviera, a joint Russian and American suggestion was put before the panel there, suggesting that all patents in the world be put under United Nations instead of individual governments. And Mr. Finis hesitated. He looked around this table. He couldn't imagine that an American was being serious about this. And he said, do you realize that this could constitute the greatest case of espionage in the world, of industrial espionage? And the American representative at the patent section of the Court of The Hague said, this is a risk we have to take. These are just little fragments come into your hands. I certainly wish that I had a syndicated column wherein you could just from day to day, because if you don't publish these things, the day that you get hold of them, why, it's gone past, just like a train sweeping into your vision and out, and you don't have time to get it into print. You cannot do it when you're writing for magazines that appear monthly, and what a shame that we do not have a conservative press in America, whereby we could give you these warning flash signs as they come up to us over there. One of the other items that I've given you, how many of you people stop to wonder why Vice President Key didn't come over to Washington for that great victory march that Carl McIntyre set up? And all this conjecture in the papers. And the whole thing was very simple. It's simple, and at the same time it's complicated. Some of you people may be taking notes here. If you are, write down one name, Tran Tien Kim, T-R-A-N, T-H-I-E-N, capital K-H-I-E-M, Tran Tien Kim. Tran Tien Kim was a colonel on the 1st of November 1960. On the 11th of November 1960, you will remember, came the first attempted coup d'etat in Saigon. And Tran Tien Kim, the colonel, was the man who brought in his tanks, surrounded the presidential palace, told his comrades he'd come to help them, and then turned his guns on them. He did that because he was ordered to by CIA. 2 days later, he was made a general for it. And you know that in every government that has risen and fallen since then, Tran Tien Kim has had a hand in toppling the government that fell and in putting in the man that rose up. He's been in all of them. Today he is the Prime Minister of South Vietnam. He's a CIA man. As Prime Minister, he names the ambassadors that CIA wants to the posts where they want them. And he is the man who made him appointed as ambassador to Washington, a man named Bui Diem, B-U-I, capital D-I-E-M. Now, Bui Diem is a CIA man. And in order to give him a hold over Vice President Key, you see, they've used another man to establish a hold over President Q, and then they establish pick out one man who will have a hold over Key. And in order to make Key have the confidence, the blind, unlimited confidence of President Key, CIA regularly gives him leaks about what America's preparing to do. Always leaks about moves that are going to be against Key or to remove one of Key's men. Only for one reason. You see, Key gets this information. He is not able to block the move, but it convinces him that his man Bui Diem is loyal to him and has inside information on everything that's going to happen. So at this point, Vice President Key believes implicitly everything that Bui Diem tells him. Bui Diem went and got hold of him, and he said, I have inside information that there is going to be a massive counter-demonstration in Washington, and somebody may be killed in it. And the American left is trying to arrange it so that somebody will be killed, so that they can use those deaths, make these men martyrs, and it will be counterproductive. It will boomerang against us, so you must not go. And that's why Key didn't go. That was the sales talk in which they prevented him from it. Again, you say, there was no way of letting you know at the time that happened. I keep looking at my watch here to see how much time I have left to talk to you. I don't have very much more. I want to cover one little topic on that so-called leak of the Pentagon Papers. My July-August special issue of H2B Reports is going to be on that. I hope that some of you will go to the trouble of picking up some copies of my report back here. I'm trying to get Dr. McDonald here to help me put up a poster all over America saying, "Ignorant of the world, unite. Read Dan Smoot and H2B Reports." I've got some reports back here. I've got some reports back here on the Cali case, the My Lai trial. I've got a report back there on our Swedish deserter camps in Sweden. And I have some other things that would be of interest to you. My latest issue, the June report, which is out there, is on Mike Mansfield. And through it, I hope to give Mike Mansfield immortality. But in one of the things that I'm going to touch on in this special July-August report on the so-called Pentagon leaks is this man, Leslie Gelb. If you go into that, why, you will learn that Leslie Gelb was the man who had charge of the Pentagon project. And you will learn that Leslie Gelb himself wrote the analytical section of the 7,000-word report. Now, that's very important. You will learn that now he is at Brookings Institute. Now, that means that he is at Brookings Institute just feeding data into computers as fast as he can. And from the data that men like that feed into computers will come the answers on which policies for our government will be decided. And that is the shocking thing about it. Because the answer which the computer gives, and which is being blindly accepted as something on which policy can be based, can only be as good as the information that's fed into it. And you know, this man Gelb, talk about double talk, he said this was not so much as a documentary history as a history based upon documents. What in the name of heaven does that mean? But delivered with all of the ponderous weight of a professor, you see. It's not so much as a documentary history as a history based upon documents, studied and restudied with ant-like diligence. In the name of heaven, why didn't somebody stand up and tell him to talk sense? What good does it do to study them if the report with ant-like diligence if the reports aren't honest in the first place? And then this man, Gelb, went on to say that they did not have any of the reports prior to 1961, but reports following 1961 were bountiful. That's a direct quote. From, this was in Time magazine, quoting Gelb, Time magazine of June 28th. Well, good heavens. It was prior to 1961 that we were making a hollow shell out of Vietnam. So how honest can these reports be? And then Gelb comes out with the most ponderous and significant statement of the bunch. He says that the President Nixon must be prodded into ordering more probes of our records, such as this one. What in the name of heaven does he mean, ordering probes on records when everything prior to 61 is lost or mislaid? And when the men who provided the information realized that they didn't tell us who provided the information, these men did not have the right to go through all the documents they wanted to. They had to ask for documents on certain information they were interested into, and then these were hauled out and given to them. But you know, I would say that there probably isn't a chance in 100 that any one of the men providing the documents on which they based their record was valid. All of the names that come to my attention of these fellows who are producing this stuff are either Far East experts that I have never heard of, or else that I've known personally and know are completely untrustworthy. And yet Gelb says that President Nixon must be prodded into ordering more probes of this nature, and then, get this, this is the quote, President Nixon must be urged to re-educate both the American Congress and the American public on communism. Read, he must be prodded and urged into convincing both Congress and you people out there that communism is no longer dangerous. And at the time Gelb said this, Western Europe was collapsing and the Mediterranean is collapsing. I wish that I had time to go over with you the whole history of the breakdown of the German army since 1966. You people back here have not any idea how many generals and colonels have retired or resigned in the last year and a half. Two aristocrats, Baron von Helsenseg and another aristocrat, a German general with a French name, Ulrich de Mézières, have come out with the theory that the German army must be an inert body for defense of the fatherland, for Germany, and it must not lift a hand even if the country is being taken over by a push from within. That it must not move except in the event of war from without. At the same time, the German army is collapsing just as fast as our own. The soldiers are being told that they are soldiers until 6 p.m. and after that, if they prefer the black flag or the red flag to the flag that flies over their barracks, that is their affair. And this, a man named Buddhasan raised his voice to try to oppose this, and he said, never forget for a moment, my countrymen, that if there is a detente in relations between us and Russia, it is not in any way because of some accord that has been signed between us and the Russians or the Americans and the Russians, but only because of the equilibrium of power in the Mediterranean and in Western Europe. And that equilibrium of power is being eroded away on our side and in their favor. And one of these days we're going to awake to the fact that it's gone completely. This is the sort of unpleasant thing that you have to watch over there. And I know how long you folks have been sitting here, and I've already gone over the 50 minutes I've been allotted. I am being fined $1 for every minute I go over, and I really can't afford to talk to you any longer. But I hope I'll have a chance to talk to you folks here in the halls while I'm here, and just let you know how wonderful it is to be with you and how much I hope to maintain contact with you in the months ahead. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.